Warsaw, 1940. The city woke up like any other morning. Trams rattled over the tracks. Shopkeepers opened their doors. Children walked beside their parents. The sky was gray, but life was still moving. No one knew that this morning Warsaw would begin to disappear. In a German military office, a large paper map lay flat on a wooden table. Boots stood around it. A German officer leaned forward and picked up a thick black pencil. Slowly, carefully, he drew a circle. The circle was not neat, but it was final. Inside that circle lived hundreds of thousands of people. The officer tapped the paper once and said nothing. Orders were already understood. By the end of the week, construction began. Not houses, not schools. Walls. 10 feet high. Thick brick. Topped with broken glass and sharp barbed wire. Soldiers watched as the wall grew brick by brick, street by street. Windows were sealed. Doors were blocked. Streets were cut in half. The Germans called it the Jewish residential district. The world would later call it something else. The ghetto. Almost overnight, 400,000 people vanished. They did not move to another city. They did not leave Poland. The rest of the world simply moved away from them. Inside the walls, life collapsed fast. The space was smaller than Central Park in New York. But it held nearly 500,000 people. Families were forced into single rooms. 10 people slept where 2 once lived. Water stopped flowing. Trash piled up. Disease waited. Food became a weapon. The Germans set the daily ration at 184 calories. That was not a meal. That was not survival. It was a slow execution. A small piece of bread. A bowl of thin soup that tasted like dirty water. People sold their furniture for food. Then their clothes. Then there was nothing left to sell. By 1941 the streets changed. Bodies lay against walls, covered in old newspapers. No one screamed anymore. There was no strength left for that. Children stopped playing. They stopped running. They sat silently on the ground holding empty cups, too weak to lift their heads. Death became normal. But the Germans had made a mistake. They had trapped too many people too close together. They had cut off food and water. And something began to grow that even they feared. Typhus. The disease spread fast. Lice moved from body to body. Fever burned through the ghetto. People died in days instead of months. And for the first time German officers were afraid. Typhus did not care about uniforms. It could cross walls. It could infect soldiers. The Germans needed help. But not just anyone. They needed someone Polish. Someone trusted. Someone who could enter the ghetto without raising suspicion. They asked for volunteers. Everyone knew what that meant. Entering the ghetto was a death sentence. If the disease did not kill you, the hunger would. Or the guards. Or one wrong word. No one stepped forward. Then quietly a hand was raised. She was 30 years old. Small. Barely 5 feet tall. She had a round, gentle face. She looked like a school teacher, not a hero. Her name was Irina Sendler. She was not a soldier. She carried no weapon. She had no rank. She was a social worker. Her father had been a doctor. He treated the poor, Jews and Christians alike. Years earlier he had died of typhus after helping sick patients. Before he died he told his daughter something she never forgot. "If you see someone drowning," he said, "you must jump in to save them whether you can swim or not." Irina looked at the ghetto wall. She saw 400,000 people drowning. She received a stamped German document. Official. Clean. Legal. Sanitary inspector. On her first day she walked toward the gate. German guards stood there with rifles. Swastika armbands bright against their coats. Their eyes followed her every step. Her heart beat fast, but her face stayed calm. The gates opened. The smell hit her first. Rotting food. Waste. Unwashed bodies. Death. It wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. Inside the ghetto the air felt thick. Buildings leaned toward each other as if they were tired of standing. People moved slowly like shadows. Children stared at her with hollow eyes. This was not a place meant for living. For 2 years, Irina returned again and again. She brought medicine. She brought food hidden under her clothes. She brought hope, one small step at a time. But she did not know yet that this was only the beginning. Something darker was coming. Something final. And soon, smuggling bread would no longer be enough. Because the wall that swallowed the city was about to start killing it faster. And one small woman would decide to fight it. Her name was Irina Sendler. Cut to black. Irina Sendler had stepped into a city that felt like a grave. But she did not falter. Every morning she put on the same coat, wrapped herself in sweaters and laced up heavy boots. She looked like a bulky, ordinary woman, but underneath she carried hope, a dangerous, forbidden kind of hope. She knew the streets. She knew the faces. She knew the rules. Almost. Inside the ghetto, death was everywhere. She had learned to recognize it. A collapsed body at the side of the street. A child too weak to cry. An old man who had not eaten in days. Every step forward was a silent promise. I will try to save you. At first, her mission was simple. Medicine, food, small comforts. She smuggled loaves of bread under her coat, tucked bottles of vaccines in her bag. Typhus was the silent enemy that the Germans feared more than the starving Jews themselves, and Irina carried the cure. She entered the ghetto as a sanitary inspector. The uniform gave her power but not safety. Guards were everywhere and one wrong move could mean death. Her hands shook every time she passed a gate, but her face stayed calm. Inside she met Jewish professors, mothers and doctors. They trusted her because she had always helped, even before the ghetto walls went up. They handed her lists of names, whispered about children hiding in basements, and thanked her quietly, knowing loud gratitude could kill them. Then July 1942 came. The air itself changed. The Germans announced a resettlement to the east. Posters went up on walls. Families were told to line up for transport. But Irina already knew the truth. The trains were not taking people to work. They were taking them to death. Treblinka. A place designed to erase existence. The realization hit her hard. Giving medicine, hiding food, it was no longer enough. She had to save lives before they even reached the trains. She had to save the children. She went to a secret underground organization, the Council for Aid to Jews, known by its code name, Zygota. They were willing to help her, but the task was enormous. She needed money, safe houses, forged documents, and people brave enough to hide children in plain sight. Her mission began. It was terrifying. Imagine standing in a small apartment with a family whose eyes were wide with fear. A mother clutched her child tightly, knowing that any mistake could lead to death. Irina had to tell them, I can save your child. But you must let me take them. You may never see them again. The parents screamed, begged, cried. Some refused. Some finally nodded, trusting the stranger with their most precious possession, their child. Irina left some apartments heartbroken. Others she returned to the next day only to find the family gone. They had been taken by the trains overnight. Every moment counted. Every delay could mean death. Irina did not work alone. A group of 20 women joined her cause. Together they created a network that seemed impossible. It was complex, moving, shifting, a map of courage hidden in plain sight. The methods were ingenious. Method 1: ambulances. Irina and a driver named Anton would wrap healthy children in bandages, pretending they were sick. Sometimes they placed them under a real stretcher carrying a corpse. The Germans, terrified of typhus, waved the ambulances through. Method 2: courthouse. A building sat half inside the ghetto, half outside. Children were hidden under benches, inside bathrooms, or shuffled quietly through corridors to the area inside. Method 3: toolboxes. For infants, mechanics helped. Boxes, potato sacks, and wooden tool chests became lifeboats. If a baby cried, Irina's specially trained dog barked. Guards hated the barking and it masked the sound of the children. The work was dangerous beyond imagination. One mistake could reveal a child's identity. Guards would check if a boy was circumcised. A child speaking Yiddish instead of Polish was a death sentence. Even a glance or a wrong expression could give them away. Irina had to turn children into ghosts. She gave them new names, new identities, new religions. She trained them to survive in a world that wanted them dead. She buried hope in jars. Thin strips of tissue, written with original names and new locations, were hidden in glass jars, buried beneath an old apple tree. If she were caught, if the lists were discovered, every child could die. The weight of the responsibility pressed on her chest every second of every day. Even walking through the streets, Irina felt the eyes of the German soldiers everywhere. Every step was a risk, but still she moved forward. She remembered her father's words. Every time fear struck, she thought, if someone is drowning, you must jump in. And she jumped, every day for thousands of children. But danger was closer than ever. Spies whispered names, neighbors betrayed secrets for a bottle of vodka or a piece of sugar. The Gestapo began hearing rumors. Someone somewhere had a name, Jolanta. Irina's blood ran cold. That was her code name in the underground. If they discovered it, the network would collapse. Thousands of lives could be lost. And yet she did not stop. Each morning she walked into the ghetto, the smell of rot and death clinging to her, the cries of children silent in her ears, the walls closing in tighter. She reminded herself of the impossible. She could save them. She must save them. Because if she did not, no one would. Her heart was heavy. Her body ached. Her legs burned. But Irina Sendler, the small, gentle woman, became the only lifeline in a city of shadows. The walls that swallowed a city were strong. The disease was relentless. The soldiers were cruel. But she was stronger. And the real nightmare was only beginning. Cut to black. Irina Sendler's world had narrowed to a single terrifying goal: save as many children as she could. Every day she walked through streets filled with death, disease, and despair. The ghetto was quiet, but the silence was heavy. It was a silence that screamed with lost lives. Her first challenge was the children themselves. They were small, fragile, terrified. Many had already seen their parents die. Some had been beaten. Some had seen trains take their siblings away, never to return. Their eyes held questions Irina could not answer. Will I see my mother again? Am I going to die? She had no words that could comfort them. But she had action. That was all that mattered. Irina's first smuggling mission was simple, yet deadly. She wrapped a young boy, maybe 7 years old, in bandages as if he were sick. She whispered to him, "Stay quiet. Follow me." Every step toward the gate felt like walking into a storm. The German guards were everywhere. Their eyes were sharp. Their rifles rested heavy on their shoulders. The boy whimpered. Irina's heart skipped. She signaled to her dog. The animal barked loudly, terrifying and wild. The guards flinched, stepping back from the sound. Irina slid past, holding the boy under the stretcher that carried a real corpse. The guards did not notice. The boy was alive. And for the first time, Irina felt a spark of hope. She repeated the process dozens of times. Then hundreds. But the ghetto was changing. The liquidation, the mass deportation to Treblinka, was underway. Children could no longer wait. Every child left inside the walls faced almost certain death. Irina's operations became faster, riskier, more creative. The courthouse method. The old courthouse on Lesno Street became a lifeline. Half the building was inside the ghetto, half outside. She would carry a child through the halls, hidden beneath her coat, sometimes placing them under benches or into empty offices. At the right moment she would guide the child to the outside world. The corridors echoed with her hurried footsteps, her heart pounding like a drum. Each time she prayed the guards would not notice. The toolbox method. For babies, Irina relied on mechanics and delivery trucks. She sedated the infants just enough to keep them quiet. Wooden toolboxes, potato sacks, and crates became tiny coffins of hope. She placed them carefully inside, drilled tiny holes for air, and sent the boxes rolling into the streets outside the ghetto. Her dog was her secret weapon. An aggressive, barking dog could mask the cries of a baby. The Germans feared the dog more than a small woman. They were trained to see danger in soldiers and weapons, not in a nurse carrying a box under a barking dog. Still, nothing could prepare her for the hardest part: turning the children into ghosts. Once outside, the children could not speak Yiddish. They could not show fear or sadness. They could not mention their parents. They were given new names, new religions, new lives. Catholic convents, orphanages, and Polish families became their new homes. The nuns and caretakers knew the risks. Hiding a Jewish child meant death. And still they agreed quietly, bravely. Every child she saved carried a memory of horror. Every child she failed weighed heavily on her heart. She was haunted by the ones she could not reach. Streets she could not cross. Rooms she could not enter. Every moment she remembered the apple tree in a backyard on 9 Larsa Street, where jars of names, the proof of identity for each child, lay buried. She had to keep moving. Every day. Every hour. Every minute counted. Irina was no longer just a social worker. She was a phantom, a shadow moving through Warsaw's ruins, a guardian of lives that no one else could protect. She wore no armor, carried no gun, but she had courage and ingenuity that surpassed armies. Even then, danger stalked her. The Gestapo had spies everywhere. Neighbors sold out Jews for small rewards. Every trip into the ghetto could be her last. They were closing in on Jolanta, the code name Irina had given herself. One slip, one wrong word, one suspicious glance, and the network would collapse. Thousands of children could die. One rainy evening, Irina carried a small girl through the streets. Mud clung to her boots. Water dripped from her coat. The girl shivered in her arms. A patrol walked by. The guard stared directly at Irina. Her body froze. Her heart stopped. She held the child closer, hidden beneath her coat. A soldier barked, "Hey!" Irina held her breath. He stepped closer. The child whimpered softly. Irina's hands shook. But then a commotion elsewhere drew his attention. He moved away. Irina exhaled. The girl was safe. Moments like this became routine. Fear was constant. Pain was constant. Yet so was determination. To keep track of every child, every location, every safe house, Irina wrote names on thin strips of tissue paper. Jars buried under the apple tree became her map, her memory, her lifeline. The Germans wanted to erase every Jewish life. She refused. Each day she risked her life not for medals, not for glory, but for the future of thousands of innocent souls. She saw families torn apart, children screaming, parents begging, trains leaving the ghetto forever. Yet each time she brought a child to safety, she felt the impossible spark of hope grow brighter. Irina Sendler, the tiny nurse with the brave heart, had become Warsaw's lifeline. She was invisible to the enemy, indispensable to the innocent. But the Gestapo were watching. The walls were closing in. The network she had built, brilliant and complex, was about to face the ultimate test. And Irina knew one day she would have to face the nightmare head-on. Because survival alone was not enough. If she was caught, the children would be lost. The names would vanish. The jars would be destroyed. And all her courage, all her ingenuity, all her love would vanish with her. Irina Sendler had faced fear every day, but nothing could prepare her for the moment when it arrived at her doorstep. October 20th, 1943. Warsaw. Cold, gray and silent. Irina was working late at her mother's apartment, carefully forging documents and updating lists of safe houses. Every name she wrote, every address she recorded, was a lifeline for a child she might never see again. She could hear the wind moan through the streets outside, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to imagine that the war might end, that maybe, just maybe, she could rest. Then the sound of boots shattered the quiet. Heavy, angry, precise. 11 men crowded into the small apartment, filling the room with the stench of tobacco, wet wool, and violence. They were Gestapo, soldiers dressed in black leather coats, but they looked more like executioners than policemen. Irina froze. Her hands clenched the papers. She had nowhere to run. No weapon. No allies at that moment. Her heart raced, her mind screamed, but her face remained calm. She had faced death before, but this was different. This time the enemy knew her name, Jolanta. The ringleader. They began tearing through the apartment, searching every corner. They ripped cushions apart. They tore up floorboards. They smashed vases. Their obsession was gold, jewels, secrets. They did not notice the small, fragile jars hidden away, the names of 2,500 children she had saved. A commander grabbed Irina by the hair and yanked her head back. "Where is the money? Where are the Jews? Tell us everything," he shouted. Irina's body was trembling, but she did not speak. Not a word. Not a name. Not a location. Her silence was a shield, protecting thousands of lives. The men dragged her through the streets, scraping her broken shoes against the cold stone. She was thrown into the back of a black sedan. Her legs were already weakened from years of exhaustion, walking miles through mud, snow, and debris. Each breath felt like fire. Each movement was agony. They drove her to Pawyak prison, a place whose name alone made the citizens of Warsaw whisper in fear. A fortress of dread. A house of screams. Irina was thrown into a cell in the basement. Pitch black. Wet floors. The smell of sewage and iron. She was not alone. Polish resistance fighters, shopkeepers, mothers, women who had defied the Nazis crowded the space. They were all waiting for the inevitable. She closed her eyes. She knew what was coming. Interrogation. Torture. Death. And yet, she drew strength from the children she had saved. She thought of the jars under the apple tree, the infants in toolboxes, the boys and girls hiding in convents. Her silence was their only hope. The next morning, they dragged her into a bright room. 3 SS officers. A single bulb swinging from the ceiling. No chairs. Just a table. The questions began. Who is Jolanta? Where are the children? Give us the names of the nuns. Irina played dumb. She lied with a straight face, claiming she was only a low-level social worker, helping sick people because she was Christian. The officers did not like lies. And then the pain came. Brutal, medieval pain. Clubs, boots, fractures. The heels smashed her legs. Her bones screamed. White-hot fire consumed her body. Ice water dumped on her to wake her after fainting. Every day she endured the same horror. 3 months. 100 days of hell. Her body broke. Her legs, her feet, her hands, all destroyed. But her spirit? Unshakable. They did not know that Jolanta was standing before them. The one they hunted. The phantom, the woman who had defied them for years. Irina had a single rule: not a word would escape her lips. Not one name. Not one address. Every child, every life depended on her silence. She bit her tongue to keep from screaming. She endured pain beyond imagination because she had already decided. If she spoke, thousands would die. Finally, the Gestapo gave up. They could not break her. They sentenced her to death by firing squad. January 20th, 1944. Warsaw, freezing winter. The executioners brought her to the courtyard, lined her against the wall. She closed her eyes. Every bone in her body screamed. Death seemed near, inevitable, a relief after months of torture. Then, a miracle born of greed and corruption unfolded. The Council for Aid to Jews, Zgoda, had bribed a single SS officer. Money. More than he could earn in 10 lifetimes. And he betrayed orders. The guards turned their guns to the sky. "Run," came a harsh whisper. Irina did not hesitate. She rolled into the snow, dragging her broken legs. Inch by inch she crawled, hiding behind ruins, barely able to move but alive. The world thought she was dead. Legally dead. Her obituary was printed. The Nazis stopped searching. Irina Sendler, broken, crippled, hunted, was now a ghost. She had survived the impossible. But the war was not over. Warsaw was still burning. The children still needed her. The jars, the network, the safe houses, they still needed her. She could not rest. She could not stop. Because being alive was not enough. She had to keep saving lives. Even crippled, even hunted, even in constant pain, Irina Sendler moved forward. A shadow in a city of horrors. A woman alone against an empire of death. And somewhere in the ashes of Warsaw, she whispered to herself, "I will not fail them." Irina Sendler had survived what no one thought possible. Tortured, broken, sentenced to death, yet somehow alive. But surviving the Gestapo was not the end, it was only the beginning. The war raged on and Warsaw, her city, was burning. By August 1944 the Warsaw Uprising began. The Polish underground army rose to reclaim the city. For 63 days Warsaw became a battlefield. Every street, every building, every home was turned into rubble. Flames licked at the sky. Smoke darkened the sun. German soldiers were ruthless, bringing flamethrowers, explosives and destruction to everything that survived. Irina, crippled and exhausted, moved through the ruins like a ghost. She used crutches, her body screaming with every step, but her mind was focused on one thing: the jars. Buried beneath the apple tree at 9 Larsa Street were the names of 2,500 children. The only proof of their lives, their parents, their heritage. If the jars were destroyed, decades of work, bravery, and hope would vanish. She crawled through rubble, avoiding German patrols, careful not to attract attention. Every corner could hide a death squad. Every shadow could be a soldier's rifle aimed at her. The city had become a trap. Finally, she reached the ruins of the house. The apple tree stood, its branches blackened by fire, but miraculously intact. Her hands shook as she dug through the frozen earth. Mud, ash, broken bricks, ice. It was all a battlefield, but she persisted. Her fingers hit glass. Jars. Cold, dirty, but intact. She held them one by one, brushing off the grime, unrolling the tissue paper inside. The ink had faded, but the names were there. Abraham, Rachel, David, Sarah. Thousands of names, thousands of lives saved from death. She wept, not from relief, not from fear, but from the weight of the world in her hands. Even then there was no time to rest. The city was still dangerous. German soldiers patrolled the streets. Buildings collapsed without warning. And the children were still scattered, still in danger. Irina continued her work with relentless determination. She managed the network of safe houses, sent instructions to social workers, and coordinated with convents and Polish families. Every day she ensured children had food, shelter, and safety. She sent forged documents, money, and supplies. She was crippled, hunted, exhausted, yet she was unstoppable. Each child she saved carried a story of terror, courage, and hope. Boys and girls learned new names, new religions, new lives. They became ghosts of their former selves, blending into the shadows of the Aryan side of Warsaw. They learned to pray in Latin instead of Hebrew. They hid their identities to survive. And still the war pressed on. Buildings collapsed around her. Explosions shook the ground. Every step outside was a gamble. She moved like a shadow, invisible, unnoticed, yet essential. In one night alone, she managed to deliver dozens of children to safety. She carried infants in toolboxes, toddlers under coats, all guided by her barked commands to her trained dog. The Germans feared the dog, but they could never guess the small nurse was orchestrating the operation. Irina became a phantom of Warsaw. A crippled woman moving through death, smoke and fire, carrying hope in her arms. Every child she saved was a victory, but every child left behind was a reminder of how fragile life could be. And then came the final threat. The Nazis were retreating but not without destruction. They burned buildings to erase evidence. They sought to kill anyone who could survive the inferno. Irina moved quickly, thinking of the jars, the children, and the legacy she had built. Every step was perilous. Every second counted. By January 1945, the silence fell over Warsaw. The Germans had retreated. The Soviet army marched in. Warsaw was a moonscape. 85% of the city destroyed. Irina moved through ash and rubble, crutches scraping against debris, searching for the apple tree. She found it still standing. The jars were intact. She pulled them from the ground, each one a testament to courage, ingenuity, and love. 2,500 names. 2,500 children saved from death. 2,500 futures secured. Even then her work was not over. The children had survived, but their parents were gone. Treblinka had taken them. Irina spent the following years tracking down the children, finding who had survived, who had forgotten their heritage, and gently returning them to their true identities. She traveled across Poland, knocking on doors, searching convents, orphanages, and families. Some children resisted. They had grown up believing they were Polish Catholics safe. They loved the nuns, their adoptive parents, their new lives. Telling them the truth was heartbreak. Every reunion, every revelation was bittersweet. But she persisted. Every child had a right to know who they were. Every life mattered. Through all this, Irina remained unknown to the world. Under Soviet rule, her story was erased. She lived in small apartments, moving frequently, quietly managing the network, feeding children, saving lives. Poland was rebuilding, but she remained a phantom. A forgotten hero. Her legs were crippled from torture. Her body ached. But her spirit was unbroken. Irina Sendler, the nurse who smuggled hope through shadows, who crawled through snow, dodged guns, carried infants in toolboxes and defied death itself, was still fighting. And somewhere in the ruins, Warsaw's ashes bore witness to her courage. She was not a soldier. She had no army. She carried no weapon. Yet she had defeated the Nazis in her own way. The jars were safe. The children were alive. And the ghost of Warsaw, small, fragile but unbreakable, continued to move through the city. Warsaw lay in ruins. Smoke still rose from the rubble. The city streets, once filled with life, were silent. But amidst the ashes, Irina Sendler continued her work. Her legs were crippled, her body weak from years of torture, but she refused to stop. She had survived the Gestapo. She had survived death itself. Now she would ensure that the children she had saved would survive too. For decades, Irina lived quietly, almost invisibly. Under Soviet control, Poland did not want stories of the underground. Heroes like her were ignored, even erased. History books made no mention of her bravery. People in her neighborhood thought she was just an old woman, living on a small pension, crippled from illness. Few knew she had once defied the Nazis, smuggled children to safety, or been sentenced to death. But she did not care. Fame was meaningless to Irina Sendler. Her life's work was the children, the ones she had saved. Every letter she wrote, every secret instruction she sent to convents and families, every forged document she created, it was all part of a silent mission. Years passed. The children grew up. They married, had children of their own, and passed on the knowledge of their origins. They were living proof of the courage of a woman most of the world had forgotten. Yet, Irina herself remained in the shadows, never seeking recognition, never telling her story. Then, in 1999, a remarkable discovery began to change everything. In Kansas, 4 teenage girls, Megan, Elizabeth, Jessica, and Sabrina, were challenged by their history teacher to find a story of a Holocaust hero nobody knew about. They searched through old newspapers and archives. In one clipping they found a small, almost overlooked mention. Irina Sendler saved 2,500 children from the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. The girls could hardly believe it. 2,500 children? Twice as many as Schindler? Why had no one heard of her? Driven by curiosity and a desire for justice, the girls started digging deeper, questioning historians, searching documents, and piecing together Irina's life. They found that she was still alive. 91 years old. Living quietly in a Warsaw nursing home. The thought electrified them. They wrote letters, sent photographs, translated messages into Polish. Weeks passed. Then came a reply in shaky handwriting. Irina Sendler was alive. She had survived everything. The girls were overjoyed. They knew they had found a hero the world had forgotten. With determination, they organized a small play, Life in a Jar, using Irina's own words. They performed it for their school, their parents, and the local community. And slowly her story began to spread. Through the efforts of these 4 teenagers, the world finally learned the truth. The woman who had risked everything to save thousands of children, who had been tortured, crippled, hunted, and ignored, was now being recognized. Irina Sendler, once a phantom moving through the ruins of Warsaw, became a voice for the countless children who had survived because of her courage. Her story touched people worldwide. Books were written. Documentaries were filmed. Awards were given. Yet, even with global recognition, Irina remained humble. She did not seek praise. She refused to call herself a hero. When asked about the Nobel Prize she had been nominated for, she simply shrugged. "I saved the children," she said. "That is all. There are others I could not save. That is what haunts me." Her regret was a testament to her humanity. She did not measure her life in medals, awards, or fame. She measured it in lives saved, in hope preserved, in the continuing existence of a people the Nazis wanted to erase. Through her courage and determination, the world learned a vital lesson. One person can make a difference, even against impossible odds. Irina had no army, no weapons, no vast resources. She had a plan, courage, and a steadfast commitment to humanity. Even in her final years, she continued quietly, ensuring that the children she had saved and their descendants knew the truth about their heritage. She was a living bridge between the horrors of the past and the hope for the future. And while her story had been hidden for decades, it finally shone for the world to see. The jars she had buried, the list she had protected, and the children she had saved, all bore witness to her courage. Irina Sendler proved that even in the darkest times, a single candle could light the way for thousands. That even a crippled, elderly woman could change the course of history. That one person's courage could ripple across generations, saving lives long after the war had ended. Her legacy was not in medals or titles. It was in the laughter of children, the continuation of families, the living proof that humanity could survive even in the face of unimaginable evil. And somewhere in Warsaw, beneath the apple tree at 9 Larsa Street, the jar still existed as a silent testament to a woman who refused to let the world forget. By the early 2000s, the world finally knew the name Irina Sendler. A woman who had risked everything to save 2,500 children from certain death during the Holocaust. Her story had been hidden for decades, buried under politics, fear, and neglect. But now, thanks to 4 teenage girls from Kansas and the courage of the children she had saved, her story was alive, and it demanded to be told. Irina, now in her 90s, lived in a small Warsaw apartment surrounded by flowers and photographs. The children she had rescued were no longer children. They were adults, parents, and grandparents. Many had never forgotten her. Some had never even met her in person. But they had heard her story, their story, through the jars she had buried and the network she had built. It was a quiet morning when the first reunion happened. Irina was wheeled into a small room filled with dozens of her children, grown and dignified. The air was heavy with emotion. Some wept openly, others could only tremble with anticipation. For Irina it was overwhelming. These were the lives she had saved, the ones she had carried in boxes, hidden under coats and smuggled past German guards. Now they were here whole and alive. One by one the adults approached her. Some kissed her hands, some hugged her tightly, some knelt before her. She looked into their eyes, trying to recognize the children she had once cradled. Faces she had not seen in decades, names she had long memorized from fragile strips of tissue paper. Abraham, Rachel, David, Sarah, all of them alive because of her. Tears streamed down Irina's face, though she tried to hide them. "I didn't do it alone," she whispered. "It was all of us. All of you. We all survived together." Yet beneath the joy there was a quiet sorrow. Some children she had saved had been lost along the way, their parents dead, their lives forever altered. Some had grown up without knowing their heritage. Even now, decades later, the weight of what she could not do haunted her. But in this room, surrounded by those she had saved, the proof of her courage was undeniable. News of the reunion spread quickly. Poland, and then the world, learned of the woman who had defied the Nazis with nothing but courage, ingenuity, and love. She was awarded countless honors. Schools, streets, and memorials were named after her. Yet Irina remained humble. She did not want fame or recognition. Her life had been about the children, not herself. Journalists asked her how she could face the Nazis every day, how she could smuggle children while knowing her own life was at risk. "I did what anyone should do," she said simply. "If someone is drowning, you save them even if you cannot swim. That is all." Her story inspired millions. Plays, books, and films were made. The Life in a Jar play became internationally famous, performed in schools and theaters around the world. Children and adults alike learned that one person, even alone, could make a difference. Yet perhaps the most powerful legacy was not the awards or the media attention. It was the lives she had saved and the generations that followed. The children she had hidden, the ones who had survived to tell their own children, carried a part of Irina's courage in them. Every laugh, every life lived fully, every family built was a victory over hatred and oppression. Even in her final years, Irina remained a quiet guardian, corresponding with children, helping them understand their history, guiding them gently. She understood that true heroism was not in glory, it was in the small acts of courage that saved lives, preserved hope, and kept humanity alive. Irina Sendler passed away on May 12, 2008 at the age of 98. Her funeral was not a quiet affair. The streets of Warsaw were filled with people. Survivors, descendants, and strangers who had been inspired by her courage lined the paths. Some wore yarmulkes, others crosses. All honored her. All remembered the woman who had saved 2,500 children, a woman whose courage had rewritten history. As people walked past, many paused at the memorial trees planted in her honor. One tree in Jerusalem bore her name, a silent tribute to the hero who had defied hatred with love. And somewhere, beneath the earth in Warsaw, the jars she had buried still lay as testaments of hope and defiance. Each glass container held the names of children who might have been forgotten but were instead remembered forever. Her story reminds the world that courage is not measured by strength or armies, but by the willingness to act, even in the face of impossible odds. One nurse, small and underestimated, proved that hope can survive even the darkest times. That even in a city swallowed by war, a single person could make a difference for thousands. Today, the children of Irina Sendler and their children continue to live, thrive, and remember. They are living proof that one life, lived with courage, can illuminate the lives of thousands more. Her legacy is eternal, not in medals or monuments but in the living history of humanity itself. Warsaw may have been destroyed, the Nazis may have tried to erase a people, and history may have almost forgotten her. But Irina Sendler, the silent hero, showed the world that even in darkness, one person's light can shine for generations. Her jars, her lists, her courage, they are more than history. They are a lesson. Never underestimate the power of a single human heart.